Good morning, students. Welcome to one and all. This is CA MS Swaminathan with you. Today, the topic for discussion, in continuance of what we have learned in the earlier session, would be Chapter 2 of Strategic Management. And the title of Chapter 2 is Dynamics of Competitive Strategy. So, this particular topic is what we will be discussing today, and as usual, let us just briefly go through the initial pages of strategic management. As you see on the screen, you have on page 5 here as part of the syllabus, second chapter, Dynamics of Competitive Strategy, which have some bullet points, okay, about 9 odd bullet points. Competitive landscape, strategic analysis, industry and competitive analysis, core competence, competitive advantage, internal and external analysis, SWOT analysis, and globalization. Okay, and if we move on from here to the following pages, we find the detailed contents where we will notice that under chapter 2, Dynamics of Competitive Strategy, we have some points listed here. Now, before we look into this, let us just try to scroll down and see as to how many pages are involved in chapter 2. It's totally 53 here, plus about 15 odd pages as part of question answer session, so 69 pages. But you have only about 52 pages till where the summary starts. So the intention is to divide this chapter into two parts. Session 1 will take care of the first 50%, which is up to the 26th page, okay, and session 2 will take care of the second half, which will start from the 26th to 27th page on to the end. So today we intend to cover only the first half. Now, up to the first half, we see that there is the introduction, a competitive landscape, strategic analysis, methods of industry and competitive analysis, and identifying the strongest weakness, strongest or weakest companies, etc., core competence, and competitive advantage. So we will be hoping to cover till competitive advantage in today's session. Okay, with this, let me take you all through the detailed chapter as part of the study material. So here on the screen, we notice that we are taking a plunge into chapter 2, which is Dynamics of Competitive Strategy. The learning objectives are listed here very clearly. Okay, now the objective of this session is going to be to give you an in-depth knowledge about the dynamics of competitive strategy. In the sense, what are all those factors, variables that a corporate or a firm will have to bear in mind and also factor when they are actually trying to set up a strategy for the organization, okay? Because we have already learned that it is absolutely crucial for any organization to strategize, and that too in a very, very effective manner. Now, when we have appreciated that point, it is a given thing that obviously we need to understand what are all those significant aspects that we need to bear in mind to be able to develop such kind of a strategy, because in the real life world, real life commercial world, competition is so high. In fact, it also tends to be cutthroat in several areas. So if a firm intends to survive and also grow, obviously it must have a clearly well thought out process or a strategy to help it achieve its vision, mission, goals, etc. Now, moving on from here, we see some quotes as usual. One is, analysis is the critical starting point of strategic thinking. 2, the idea is to concentrate our strength against our competitors' relative weakness. Okay, so 2 things that we learned here, which you can obviously try to memorize as it's quite simple. Now, moving on from there, we see that there is a chart presented in your study material as chapter overview, starting with competitive analysis or competitive landscape. Okay. Now, in this topic, we move with the introduction. Now, students, what you need to bear in mind is, before we start off this topic, just try to look at life in this way. Can a human, any living being, survive in a society in the absence of any other person? If we talk about a person surviving in a society, it is understood that there is the person, two, there is an external object which is a society. Now, there has obviously got to be an interaction between the person and the society. Why? Because the person is part of the society. The society is a macro object and the person happens to be a micro object, correct? Now, what I'm trying to drive into your mind is the fact that if the person basically has to bring about some improvements for the purposes of ensuring that he or she survives the adversities presented by nature or by society, then broadly two different factors will have to be considered. One will be, what are all those changes that might come up in the external environment as far as the individual is concerned, which is a society. Nothing to do with the body of the individual or the mind of the individual, right? Anything which is outside of the body of the individual will be external. So he or she will have to really spend some time to analyze, think through, and arrive at some meaningful conclusions about what changes are likely to take place in the external environment which should impact the individual. And two, the individual will certainly have to spend quality time to try and understand the internal environment of the individual itself, meaning what are all those factors that might affect the body and the mind of the individual, which is absolutely internal. Okay, so we can certainly conclude that the external environment will certainly have a bearing on the individual, which could eventually affect the internal environment. Correct? And sometimes the internal environment also has an effect on the extent of impact the external environment can have on the person. For example, if the person happens to be very weak physically, but still picks up exercising, physical exercising on a regular basis, then eventually the person develops immunity, correct? A good frame of body, which in other words helps the person enhance the immunity levels and therefore will probably tend to fall sick only once in a while or probably even never, correct? So we understand that yes, the external environment can impact the internal environment and the reverse is equally true. Now this example of the individual in the society must be borne in mind by you very clearly. So there is something called an external analysis and there is something called an internal analysis. And if the individual really is interested in improving the health condition, in the first place, the individual must have identified the fact that he or she is weak or he or she is not weak but is likely to be affected adversely because of climatic changes. So he or she will have to incorporate certain amendments to their lifestyle, maybe eating habits, maybe exercising pattern, maybe sleeping habits, etc., etc., to lead a healthy life, correct? As well as to have a longevity of life as well, correct? Now, from a corporate perspective, this can also be looked at as the ability to survive, grow in the society, right? So the individual also will have to try and spend time to try and understand what are all those variables, okay, factors Let me put it this way, a collection or an amalgam of factors, combination of several factors in the external environment which may impact the individual. Not all factors in the external environment affects the individual. For example, if there is going to be two people who are fighting across between themselves in New Delhi, how does it affect this individual who might be positioned in Chennai? Correct? So we understand that not all factors, if it is going to heavily rain in Bihar, that doesn't affect a person in Chennai directly. Whereas the rain had happened in Chennai itself, then of course it affects the individual directly there. So we are able to understand that not all changes that take place in the external environment, not all factors that are existing in the external environment, not all interrelationships between various variables or factors in the external environment will certainly have the same effect or even an effect on the individual. Correct? If you have been able to clearly understand this, for example, let me give you another example. In a class, if you are sitting, okay, and if there are going to be 300 people existing in the class, and you are occupying the last bench, and there is one student in the first bench who has contracted fever as well as cough and cold, and if the person is going to be repeatedly coughing, and since 300 students are there, obviously we expect that there would be, for example, let us say 25 to 30 rows, each row having 10 students. Now, if there are going to be 30 rows, now you don't expect that the fever, the cough, and the cold will get transmitted from the first bench to the 30th bench, right? Whereas, or rather, even if it is going to be transmitted, the probability of it getting transmitted to you would be extremely remote. So we understand that the impact is not absolutely direct or significant. It could be remote, and sometimes it can even be absolutely irrelevant if there are, for example, 50 rows. Now just make a slight amendment to our example and consider that if the room had only 10 students and let's say just 2 rows, and the student in the first row is now coughing repeatedly, then what are the chances that you might also contract the same thing? Now the chances in this example clearly communicate that it would be pretty high. So through this example you will understand that not all factors taking place in the external environment can directly affect or impact me. If at all it impacts me, the degree of impact will certainly vary, correct? And sometimes there would be no impact at all, correct? Absolutely clear? Now, as we spoke about the fever, cough, which could be airborne, when I say there could be no impact, for example, whether there are 2 rows or whether there are 20 rows or 100 rows, if the student in the first bench actually falls down and gets hurt, now can you imagine that such an event will get transmitted across even to the neighbor? Not possible. So this is why I say not all factors taking place in the external environment need essentially impact a person. Okay. Now moving away from this example, which is a fundamental thought process that you must carry with you throughout this chapter. Okay. You must now try to relate the individual to an individual firm in this chapter and the society to an industry, which you have already learnt in economics. That an industry is nothing but a collection of firms which basically try and operate in the same product or product range and also try to obtain buyer patronage who will be falling in the same bracket. Okay, typically same type of customers or customers with identical likes, dislikes. So there is something called a firm or an organization or an entity, which is the individual entity, and there is an industry which represents a collection of such firms. So I repeat, from our example which I gave you at the start, equate the individual to the individual firm or an entity or an organization, say X Limited or X Partnership and Co. Okay, X and Co. Similarly, in our example where I said the society, equate the society with the industry, which is nothing but all those firms in the industry, in the economy, which are in automobile industry. For example, Maruti, Mahindras, Hyundai, etc., etc. Okay. Now, whatever I have tried to explain to you in terms of variables, external atmosphere impacting you with in varying degrees, or factors in the external environment impacting, not impacting, etc., will all equally apply even in our example in this chapter. Now, if you try to go back and see in our example of the individual and the society, if the individual has to lead a healthy lifestyle as a starting point, first the individual will have to appreciate that. Well, what exactly is meant by healthy lifestyle? Correct? Now, when I am actually introduced by someone to a set of 100 people or 200 people in a new area, I would first try to understand what is the type of people who reside in that new area. What are all those characteristics that make up the set of people in that area? Correct? Why would I want to know? I would like to know whether I am in a position to better their performance. Correct? Take a classroom. If you are going to get newly admitted in another school, okay, in standard 10 or whatever be it, and if you have been a topper from the previous school, you don't take it for granted that you will continue to be a topper even in the school. First, you will, when you set your foot in the school, you are wanting to first frame a thought in your mind as to what is the quality of the student, not one student, but the set of students in your class. You might not be interested in the set of students in ninth standard and 11th standard, but if you are getting into 10th, you don't want to restrict yourself just to the 40 students of class A. If there are four divisions, four sections like class A, B, C, D, you want to be able to come to some conclusion or arrive at some meaningful thought process, judgment about the quality of the 159 other students in class A, B, C, D. Why? You would want to be the top even now. So unless you frame some opinion about them, it's going to be very difficult for you to come to any conclusion and work out your strategy as to how exactly will you be able to achieve your goal. Now, when you talk about actually trying to ascertain information about the 159, obviously you will also appreciate that if you want to compare yourself against each of those 159, I think a person will go mad. The entire exercise will become meaningless because you will be loaded with so much of information that the entire exercise will become futile. You will get lost in the maze of information and it becomes meaningless. Therefore, now to lend some bit of meaningfulness to this analysis, okay, what you would want to do is logically, you would want to group those 159 students as in statistics into certain groups wherein we would say each group has some similar characteristics. For example, out of the 159, you might want to say that let me divide them into 8 different similar groups. Group 1 basically represents students who are in the 25% bracket, group 2 the 35% bracket, and so on and so forth till group 8, where you feel that all students in group 8 are ones who are securing or scoring 95% to 96%. Therefore, now you are able to meaningfully come to a conclusion that much of risk that you face is essentially from the group 8 as a stiff competition and not from group 1 to group 7, because they are likely to score only below 95%. Now you can come to, you can think through pretty well Clearly chalk out a strategy for yourself, because now you know you are not loaded with information about the entire set of 159 students, but you are now restricting yourself only to some meaningful data about just 20 students falling in group 8. And now you can find out as to how and where should you concentrate such that you are able to excel these 20 and be the topper. I hope this point will be crystal clear to you. These are practical examples that you might have executed in your life. Now, there is nothing that is going to change in this chapter. All that happens is you will have to be able to apply those concepts here. Now, this concept of saying that you will divide the 159 into different lots of 8 groups representing 7 into 20 plus the 19, in other words, you're grouping them, is a technique that is used even in this chapter. A little later, you will read it as strategic group mapping. Now, in that concept, you will see that two variables are being used in the x and y axis. So you may want to look at, for example, one student who is doing very well in English as well as in mathematics, another one in physics as well as, let's say, in history. So two variables will be picked up simultaneously, and you want to compare and find out what is the relative performance of that particular group against which you intend to compete. That will help you come to some meaningful conclusion. Okay. Now, starting off from here in the introduction, we find a competitive landscape. Now, what is this landscape all about? We all understand that, for example, if we, as I said to you in our example, when you set your foot in a new school, you are wanting to judge very importantly, the quality of the student in the school rather than the quality of the building. The building could even be a 100-year-old building which has not been painted over the last 10 years. That has got no connection with the type of children who will be studying in the school, correct? So imagine that if you have your own friend who is a competitor, who is actually judging the quality of the building, whereas you are judging the quality of the student, obviously who will be able to arrive at a better analysis in terms of strategy? It will be you only, because you have looked at what is most relevant and the other person is looking at something which is absolutely irrelevant. So it's critical for us to understand from a strategy framing perspective that we always target what is absolutely relevant, okay, and leave out things which are irrelevant. Now, when you look at those relevant items, never forget the fact that we are not in a perfect science, meaning management is always something which is extremely dynamic. So you will have a lot of variables which are involved where the interrelationships cannot be understood clearly. You will know that strategy is proactive as well as reactive. So there are changes taking place in the external environment which is fundamentally dynamic in nature, and therefore, since you were not able to judge these things upfront before the change took place, obviously you will have to factor these things as the changes are introduced and then amend your plans accordingly, or you should already have thought of another alternate plan. Okay. Now, when I said to you that you are trying to judge the quality of the 159 students, take another example. If you walk across to your school in, let's say, any metropolitan city, you are not much bothered about the greenery or anything. You hardly get to see anything. Suppose you are on a vacation, let's say to Ooty or Kodaikanal, or let's say you move to Kulu or Switzerland. You are essentially interested in looking and admiring the vast expanse of land where there is a lot of greenery, lush green fields, etc. Okay, rivers. What are we talking about? We are naturally admiring the landscape, which I am highlighting here, pointing here in blue, competitive landscape. Now, when you are on a vacation, obviously you are not trying to compare when you are in Switzerland Let me look at the landscape of Switzerland vis-a-vis the landscape of Italy, and you have actually gone to enjoy your vacation. Now your father or mother is showing you the landscape of Italy, and you start weeping there itself as to why have you not taken me to Italy? Then how can you enjoy your vacation? So what we are interested in is when you are trying to appreciate the landscape, you should know the objective of trying to enjoy that landscape. It's a vacation. Now, here in business, organizations are not into vacation. What are they into? Survival of the fittest, which is nothing but competition. Therefore, the organization which is wanting to start itself afresh, or even existing organizations for that matter, will have to look at the level of competition, the nature of competition, etc. prevailing, the quality of competition prevailing, the number of competitors prevailing in the market, okay? What are all those other pressures that that rival organizations will have to take up? Therefore, competitive landscape is the starting point. You want to first have like a canvas. If you intend to enter into CA line, once you qualify, if you want to start practicing the profession as a, let us say, taxation advisor or a forensic auditor investigating frauds, first you must be able to get information as to how does forensic audit look like? What are all the options available? What is the use if you get into that line and then you come to know that there is hardly any room or scope to make money? When you took the profession of chartered accountancy, imagine if you are told after qualifying that the salary for a chartered accountant is going to be just 1 rupee per month and the only job opportunity available is in organization XYZ. That is it. Had you known this before, would you ever have taken up the course? You would dare not, correct? So, what does this clearly indicate? It indicates that the fact that you have chosen the course of chartered accountancy itself clearly indicates, without your having studied strategic management in standard 11 after your 10, that you are born with the talent of strategic management itself. You have analyzed for yourself as to what are the vista of opportunities available for a chartered accountant. What's the entire range of opportunity? Which are all the industries which open up to a chartered accountant? You have conducted a landscape analysis, right? At the same time, you also want to know in those industries it's not that only chartered accountancy is the occupation prevailing there. There are marketing people, sales people, there is a company secretary, a cost accountant, an MBA from the IIMs, etc., an IIT. But among all these things, meaning from all the competition you face, you chose chartered accountancy as a profession and said, let me dive deep into this because I feel that it is going to be profitable. It will be a lucrative line, correct? And this analysis will have to be done just not once. It will have to be done throughout the life cycle of the industry itself, because we don't know at what point in time what changes might be introduced by the government, what technological changes, socio-economic changes might take place, on account of which an industry which was flourishing very well at one point in time might probably face an extinction as well. And therefore, before it gets extinct and we find that we are stuck in deep losses, probably we should appreciate that we should get out of this line and diversify into something else. So, this kind of analysis will have to be done constantly. Okay, so I hope the perspective is clear to you. And then we move on to the strategic analysis, where obviously we are trying to, after having understood the competitive landscape as to to what extent the automobile industry or the direct taxation practice industry is expected to flourish, If you happen to form an opinion that direct practice is not going to be very extensively used in India, then why would you want to cast your career in that line? You would obviously want to transition into some other line, maybe GST practice. But if you conclude based on valid data that direct taxation practice is the thing that should be taken up in the future, then would you obviously not want to dive deep into it? Your decision would be completely different in that case. That's the kind of information that you are able to establish as part of competitive landscape. So it helps corporates decide, should I invest money in a particular line or should I not invest money? Meaning, should I even divest money if at all I have already invested there? Or if I have never invested there, then what is the other alternative I need to look at for the purposes of investing my money so that I am able to generate adequate returns for my shareholder? Okay. And then once you decide upon this, you have the strategic analysis. Okay. So now the competitive landscape is something that is explained in depth. Now here I would just like to draw your attention to one fact that understanding of competitive landscape requires an application of competitive intelligence. Okay. Obviously, we understand that the basic level of intelligence in humans must exist. Similarly, you should be able to arrive at meaningful conclusions regarding the level of competition expected in an industry. Okay, otherwise the entire exercise will go down the drain. Now, moving on from there, steps to understand competitive landscape. One, identify the competitor. It helps you answer who are the competitors and how big are they. Two, understand the competitors, meaning what are their products and services? What are the different types of products and services that they offer? For example, if Sarvana Bhavan is not offering buffet services, then you decide and you feel that customers are actually desperately wanting buffet service, then you can possibly be the person who would introduce buffet service. Okay, suppose there is a restaurant which is not providing AC room facility, then you could provide having meals in AC rooms as well, something like that. Three, determine the strengths of the competitors, what their financial position is, what are they likely to do next, etc. Okay, this is very important for you to know, because in a war, you never get into a war without ever judging your enemies or rivals' strengths and also ascertaining their weaknesses. Correct? Because once you know their strength, you will have to plan accordingly to try and address those issues. Similarly, if you know their strengths, which is the fourth point here, determine the weaknesses of the competitors. If you know the weakness of your rival, then you know that you can hit them hard there itself so that you win the battle. Okay? But anyway, students, please do not misinterpret this part, that hit them hard meaning you hit them below the belt, meaning never hit a person below the belt. In other words, do not practice unfair practices for the purposes of establishing the organization. Okay, it should be a fair war that is waged with your rival. And then we move on to fifth point, put all of the information together and then you will be able to arrive at a meaningful conclusion. Now, when I say put all of the information together, let us, for example, take another case. If you want to prepare tea for yourself, you take hold of the tea leaves, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of milk, a little bit of water, okay, and a little bit of, let's say, ginger or garam masala. You keep all the ingredients together, you arrange them, and if you do not actually put them into a utensil and boil them together, okay, if you don't do that, then you are not putting all of the information together. Now, can you actually take the tea leaf, swallow it first, then separately the sugar, and then let's say the milk, gulp the milk, the water, and the ginger, and say, well, I think everything has got assimilated, digested in my stomach, and I have consumed tea. That's not the case. You know that the final output has to blend well. That's exactly what happens at this stage. And then we move on to strategic analysis, where we understand, as I said in our example about the individual and the society, that there is an internal environment, there is an external environment. Okay, in the internal environment, you can obviously have strengths and weaknesses. Correct? If the white blood corpuscle count in the body is going to be very high, then it's a strength because we say that the immunity level will be very high. But if it is going to be low, then we say that it is a threat, meaning the person can stand exposed easily to any external adversities. Now, this is with regard to the internal environment, where you see strengths and weaknesses. If you look at the external environment, we talk about opportunities and threats. Okay, if you find, for example, that you are very good in logical reasoning and logical framing of thought process, then obviously any job which requires logical thinking like coding, okay, or developing any Android based apps, it would be throwing up an opportunity to you. Okay, whereas if you are one who is not at all good at that, then if that kind of a job is going to be thrust upon you, it becomes a threat. Correct? That's what we are trying to say. Such an analysis will have to be done when we talk about a strategic analysis. Now, here we also refer to the two most important situational considerations. When I say situational consideration, as I said, let's now, what is the meaning of situational consideration? Though not a subject oriented example. Now, suppose you were to step into a bathtub, okay? Now, would we actually try to measure very carefully what is the depth of the bathtub and all? Not at all, correct? Whereas, if you are now going to be taken to a new village where there is a river which is flowing across, and if I have to step into that river, would my attitude be the same as it would be when I try to jump into a bathtub? It would definitely not be the same. Why? I am a bit petrified or nervous about stepping into the river because I don't know what is the depth of the river. Probably it could be very deep and I might even sink. Correct? So, situational consideration, I need to first understand the situation that I am stuck in, and then I will have to consider what are all those factors that are relevant there. Since we are referring to a strategic analysis, the two most important situational considerations are one, industry and competitive conditions. Industry is the collection of firms, which is automobile industry, software industry, hardware industry. So, what is the automobile industry conditions at the moment prevailing in India? What is the competitive condition? Now, when you look at these, how can I come to a conclusion without getting hold of data about governmental regulations affecting this industry, about the ability for finance to be raised, about the investors' interest, about the shareholders' expectations, about the quality of staff that I will get, HR I will get. There are several factors that will have to be borne in mind, and the ability to be able to have a sustainable research and development team. There are so many aspects to be considered, like an organization's own competitive capabilities, resources, internal strengths, weaknesses, and market position. Okay, now this is dealt with at great length in the chapter. So, issues to consider for strategic analysis, you know that strategy evolves over a period of time. Correct? Yesterday, in one of the earlier sessions, we understood that a series of past measures is what decides the current strategy that we have to adopt. So, strategy is not built just based on one thought. Now, the result in a CA foundation or, for example, in an intermediate is not the culmination of efforts put in by a student just on the day of the exam. The student has worked over a long period of time, which is what helps them adopt an appropriate strategy just before the day of the exam. So, strategy evolves over a period of time, and then balance of external and internal factors. The term balance is very important. Please remember the example which you might see in parks, a seesaw, correct? Now, there is a median or a middle point, correct? Which is the balancing part. Like you look at even grocery shops where there is a weighing machine as a balance in the past, the manual balancing scale. So there is a balance, and in the middle there is a needle pointer. So here there are two variables, the external and the internal factors, which we have discussed quite a few times in the past. So one who is strategizing will have to try and balance, even out the external and internal factors. For example, when you are waging a war, you know that your weaknesses are X, Y, Z, and your competitor rivals' strengths as 1, 2, 3. You try and match them and try to see how those your rival strengths can't hit your weakness very badly. Similarly, if you have your strengths, how best can you put it to use such that your rivals' weaknesses will stand exposed? Okay, so this is the fine act of balancing. Now, for all those of you who might probably be in college as well, so you have to strike a balance between the responsibilities you have at college as well as that is expected of you in CA intermediate, correct? So, but you realize that there is a constraint or a limitation. What is the limitation? Each one of us has only 24 hours in a day. You need time to sleep. You need to maintain your health in good condition. So the time that is available at your hand is something that you have to split between your college requirements as well as your CA intermediate commitments. Now, how best you can do it, it will be based on how well are you able to balance your responsibilities and your time commitments. Okay, so balancing of external and internal factors is important, and then there is a risk principle. Now, when you look at the strategic risk, there are two ways in which we would like to simultaneously look at it. Strategic risk can be analyzed based on timeline as a short run or a short term or a short time strategic risk, long term strategic risk, and similarly, strategic risk can also be analyzed in two ways based on the nature, that is, external strategic risks or internal strategic risks. Okay, now that's something, for example, strategic risks can obviously arise either in the short run or in the long run. Now, in the short run, it can arrive either based on factors arising in the external environment or in the internal environment itself. Okay, as we see that if I or any person has to contract some fever or cough, it could be because the external environment has had some adversities which is now impacting me, or my level of immunity, the environment is fairly stable, but I think my immunity drops to subpar levels. Then obviously my capacity is not up to the mark, my preparation for the examination is not up to the mark, and therefore I lose, I fail, is an internal issue, correct? Similarly, if you look at it from the long run perspective, changes can take place in the external environment, which obviously is very difficult to predict, and therefore such changes can lead to obsolescence of your existing strategy. This is why we learnt in one of the earlier sessions that to avoid this obsolescence as much as possible, strategy is always taken to be reactive also in nature. Okay, so be proactive as well as be reactive. And then if your internal inconsistencies are going to be developed, meaning you are not actually adding up to your internal capacities, then in the long run, we are going to face issues with regard to mismatch between the internal capacity and the strategy. For example, if I go and commit to a customer that we are going to deliver to you a car that would be absolutely new model, it's going to be out of the box car, give us 1.5 years time. And in the meantime, we find that in 1.5 years, our organization has not taken any initiative, meaningful steps to absorb high quality staff in the research and development department to facilitate the delivery of such kind of a car to the customer. then what do we say? In the long run, there have been inconsistencies in terms of internal strengths, which is not helping us match up to our strategic commitments. So from there, you move on to strategic analysis here. There's an external analysis and an internal analysis in this table. Now here, quickly, in the external analysis, we find customer analysis about the various segments that we can divide the customer into. For example, as we saw in banking, retail banking, corporate banking, investment banking. Let's say, for example, customers with regard to retail requirements, it could be cement, it could be steel, it could be the consumables, okay, like the, let's say, durable goods like washing machines, refrigerators, air conditioners, or it could be edible items like your fast food or your vegetables, etc., etc. Unmet requirements or needs of the customers. Competitor analysis is very important. How does your competitor fare against you? Market analysis. Please remember, competitor is an individualistic approach. Market is the collection, the industry-related approach, collection of firms. Environmental analysis, which is technological, government, economic factors. In internal analysis, you have your own profitability, your sales, your customer satisfaction, etc. The reason I touch this table is essentially not because of what I discussed till now, but determinants analysis. Now, what does this mean? All that this means is, if you see past and current strategies, strategic problems, organizational capabilities and constraints, financial resources, strengths and weaknesses. These factors would determine the future fate of your organization. Since they determine the future state of your organization, they are called as determinant analysis. Just to explain this term, I actually read through this entire box. Okay, now moving on from there, we move on to the concept of methods of industry and competitive analysis. I have already explained to you, even through our individual example in the society, that it is absolutely critical that the individual who is the a person or a firm will have to conduct an analysis of the society or the industry in which you want to start an industry, a firm, or you want to continue surviving or continue growing. Correct? Now there, looking at it from the landscape perspective, we step down, we drill down into dominant economic features of the industry. Obviously, this is what will help us understand whether it is meaningful for me to invest in that industry or stay invested, continue staying invested in that industry, or quit from that industry and move to some other industry. So there are some factors that are listed here down below in bullet points, which you can certainly go through. These should certainly be self-explanatory. Now here, the third point is something which is important specifically, not that others are not important. Market growth rate and position in the business, within bracket, early development, rapid growth and takeoff, comma, early maturity, comma, saturation and stagnation and decline. All that this means is, if you are wanting to start a business in a particular industry, let's say, for example, computer technology, software industry, and suppose your analysis, research communicates that already there are a lot of competitors in the technology or the software industry, and the growth in that industry obviously will be dependent upon the stage, the stage in the life cycle of the industry. Meaning, if the industry has already matured, then you don't expect a very high growth rate. Whereas if the industry is in a nascent stage, starting stage, then you can expect a very high rate of growth, meaning you could take the risk and invest there and try to reap maximum benefits. But if it is going to be in a very matured industry, then it means it is fairly stable. Much of pitfalls will be avoided. Therefore, since the risk is lesser, the return also will be lesser. Now look at it even from a human life perspective. Now, at the age of, let's say, if a person is aged 100, Okay, for example, the great grandfather or the grandfather of Mr. X. Let's say Mr. X is 15 years old. Okay, now if both of them were to contract some problem, let's say high temperature, do you think the doctor is going to give any mega treatment to the 100-year-old grandfather or to the 15-year-old child? Obviously, the treatment and all will be given more to the 15-year-old child. The simple reason being that the return that you expect will be better, meaning the child is expected to recover and still has a long life to live. Whereas in the case of the 100-year-old, the tendency would be, well, don't load them further with all this medication. Already the body is frail and the person is ailing. So long as the person leads a very peaceful life in the last few days, it's okay. I hope you get the point. So, in the life stage of the human, there's a starting stage, there is a old age. Now, a newborn baby, starting stage, the parent will very happily lift the baby. Now, today, tomorrow, for example, or today after the class, please tell your mother, Mummy, why don't you actually carry me the way you carried me when I was a newborn baby? And just wait for the reaction. If at all by chance your mother gives you a tight wrap, please don't pass it on to me. Keep it with yourself itself. I hope you will get the point very clearly that there is a big difference in the stage of life which impacts the rate of growth. Okay. Now, after this, we have nature and strength of competition. While you may read the para, you must understand that obviously, if at all you want to have a clear cut uh, process of starting a business, it's very important you understand the nature and strength of competition as well. As I said to you, it is critical that when you step into the new school as a new student, you understand the nature of competition, what is the quality of student existing there, and the strength of competition, how intense. Is it that the 159 can be divided into the erstwhile 8 groups where there is only a 20 who is scoring 95 to 96%, or probably 100 out of the 159 are scoring in the bracket of 95 to 96, then the competition is more intense. So you need to understand this to be able to come up with a very intelligent and practical plan of action to execute your thought process. And here, when we talk about, you might read that Porter's five forces model. Now, this is something that is out of syllabus for you in your intermediate. It used to be there in the past. Now, this has been taken into your foundation syllabus. You would have studied this Porter's five forces model hopefully in your foundation, okay, as part of your one of the subjects. And if you want, you may just brush up your knowledge from there. Okay, like buyer's bargaining power, seller's bargaining power, the threat of substitutes, etc., or the rivals, etc., and such factors, technological changes, environmental changes. And this model has been introduced by Mr. Michael Porter, who's a management person. And all that he is prescribed is something which is a generic model. It is not that this model is the only model available for the purposes of conducting such kind of analysis about the nature and strength of competition. It is a very famous or popular model because it is applicable to any type of industry. Okay, so he has only prescribed something which is a general model, a framework. Okay, now it is up to the person who is picking up the model as a starting point to consider these five. He's not introduced many points because, again, as I said, in the case of strategic group mapping, it will become a meaningless exercise. So, to restrict it to be meaningful, only five factors have been considered, and that's all about it. And then we have triggers of change. Okay, now that's something which is very important, meaning driving forces. Now, for example, we need to understand what the driving forces are, meaning uh, as you are actually in an industry, you're operating in a business, it's very important for the entrepreneur or for the management to try and keep estimating or expecting the changes taking place in the outside environment. You can't make an assumption that nothing is going to change or that the external environment will never be dynamic, it will be static only. That's an absolutely horrendous assumption to make. The external environment is certainly going to be dynamic. Now, it's not possible, obviously, for you to be able to establish all the changes which should take place in the outside world. But at least something you might be able to, correct? Now, all that this aspect is trying to highlight is among the changes that might take place in the external environment, which is all fine, we need to understand that what are all those things if I have to be able to compete and survive and grow in this particular industry. What are all those factors which should be considered as the driving force? Okay, for example, because if I can give you quite a few examples which will be quite technical, let me give you another example which will be outside of the syllabus subject, but hopefully it will try to communicate the point to you. Now, in quite a few cases you might find that some children, for example, let's say a child is doing exceptionally well in let's say classical music, vocal music, maybe instrumental music, okay, or some child is doing exceptionally well in dance as an art or painting as an art. Now, if the child tends to be quite honest, more often than not, we get to hear that the driving force behind me was my mother or my father. So someone has been able to push, provide the required thrust to the child to be able to go and bring about those changes in its life by learning certain things. So if you are going to be in some industry, maybe automobile industry, maybe direct taxation practice industry, maybe software industry, you must be able to ascertain as to what are those few factors or forces that will drive this particular industry in the future. Now, why are you interested in knowing that? Okay. Now, take another example. Let's say, for example, there is a couple. Okay. There are 10 couples, and 9 of them or 8 of them have children. 2 of them, unfortunately, are not blessed with a child. Now, if the 8 couples' children are studying in standard 2, 3, 4, whatever be it, and the mother is so busy trying to prepare the breakfast, the lunch, the snacks, etc., and then arranging for the homework, whatever be it, getting the dress, uniform ready, etc., etc. The mother has no time to think about anything else. So, the driving force, as far as this is concerned, for the mother is the child. Correct? The activity of the child drives, propels the mother to get into this activity. Now, look at the couple 9 and 10. What happens? They don't have a child, unfortunately, and therefore, what happens is the entire day is available at the disposal of the couple. Well, the gentleman is off to his work, the lady probably is not as busy. If someone were to ask the person says, the lady says that there is no driving force. Well, I am giving you a very drastic example. In today's world, we might say that you are keeping yourself busy in several other fields, like I would want to go and learn a new language, maybe a German, maybe a Spanish. Then there is still a driving force there, which makes you undertake certain things. So, what we are trying to understand is to keep the propulsion on, some driving force was required. Similarly, when you are practicing in direct taxation or you are in automobile industry for the last 20 years, there is no guarantee that just because you have been there for 20 years, you will continue to rule the automobile industry into the future, into the near future, or into the far future. Why? There might be some competitor who might emerge and drive you out. So you should be able to entertain and appreciate a thought that whatever customers wanted in the past 20 years is not what they are going to want in the next 20 years. The wants will change. I'll give you a classic example. Could one think of e-banking, IMPS transactions, Google Pay 40 years ago? Were banks not existing then? They were existing. Did banks provide e-banking, net banking, and all these things, mobile banking in those days? No. Then why should they provide it today? Because customer is demanding. Correct? So the driving force, which means what are all those forces that is likely to basically introduce changes in this particular industry in the future, such that if you do not match up to them, then you have to die a natural death. That's very important for you to be able to judge. That's what this point highlights here, as I'm highlighting here in blue. The most dominant forces are called driving forces. And what are driving forces? If you read, while it is important to judge what growth stage an industry is in, there is more analytical value in identifying the specific factors causing fundamental industry and competitive adjustments. This is what is the crux of the discussion. Causing fundamental industry and competitive adjustments. Okay, now moving on from here, the other part is all self-explanatory, most common driving forces. Then we move on to identifying the strongest and weakest companies, strategic group mapping. I have already spoken at great length about this concept at the start of today's session. A strategic group consists of those rival firms which have similar competitive approaches and positions in the market. You may go through this. I am sure these will be self-explanatory to you if you've understood whatever I've explained then. Likely strategic moves of rivals. Now this is very, very critical. Now let me give you an example which will sum up this entire paragraph. Let us, for example, say that there is a cheetah which is approaching a deer from the opposite direction, means facing the cheetah is facing the deer. Now, as far as the deer and the cheetah are concerned, we know for sure that they are rivals. The moment the deer spots the cheetah, what do you think the deer would do? It would definitely run at its maximum speed towards the cheetah? Certainly not. So what is happening? The moment the deer is able to spot a cheetah, what does it do? Likely strategic moves of rival. It tries to judge what exactly would be the next step of the cheetah. And that's going to be something which will be devastating as far as it is concerned. Therefore, it initiates appropriate action such that it flees that place. Correct? Take another case. Now, for example, if the same cheetah, okay, has been spotted by the deer, but then the cheetah happens to spot another bigger prey available in a rather closer vicinity than the deer, and the cheetah turns in the direction and starts running in the direction. Now, what do you think actually the deer would do? Would it want to flee at top speed? Certainly not. So, likely strategic moves of rivals. Take another example. You are now in CA intermediate. It's your bounden duty to be able to try to judge and estimate what would your rivals, they are your friends, your batchmates, but from an exam perspective, they are your rivals. What would be the strategic moves of your rivals? How would they be preparing? What would be their plan of action? How would they want to score the marks? How would they want to outbeat your performance? And you must take action to counter that. Then we move on to key factors for competitive success. Okay. Now these are basically so-called KSFs, key success factors. In every business, in every organization, in every industry, there will be, several success factors. We are not interested in all of them. We are only interested in key success factors, meaning few. Just let me go back again to the example we spoke about earlier, where you don't want to conduct an analysis between you and each of those 159 students, but you want to restrict it to groups. Well, you did it against you versus 8 groups. If you could have done it as 1 versus 3 groups, maybe if that is more effective, then it is very good. Okay, so that's key success factors. For example, Every industry like retail, clothing industry, okay, retail garment industry will have designs as a key success factor. Imagine if you open a retail garment industry where you provide specifically for women's clothing, you provide only pink dress and nothing other than that, and the pink dress is also plain pink. What do you think, how many takers will be there? You know the answer. Whereas if you provide n number of designs which are arranged in a very colorful manner, okay, then there are obviously more takers, correct? So similarly, let us for example consider that you are introducing n number of designs in shirts for, let's say, gents. Probably, I think again the answer is a given thing. Not many might be interested in these things. We know that, well, as far as they are concerned, they might go and shop just for a few minutes and come out with something saying, well, I think I purchased this. So the key success factor when it comes to garment industry with regard to women would be different, with regard to gents would be different. You should be able to identify those key success factors and target it. And when we say key, please do not have n number of factors, restrict it only to a couple of them and ensure you're on top of them. For example, from your study perspective, the key success factor, for example, would be what? Your effort, okay, and your health. Of course, it is very important that parents' health is very good, money flow is there so that the fee is paid, correct? Okay. Now for example, let us say in one case the father loses a job. At least we can go and borrow money from somewhere and say that, well, I will repay the money to you, correct? Now imagine, for example, if the mother is unable to cook, from somewhere you can at least seek the help of some other person. So, though mother's health is very important, father's health and earning is very important, our family's my financial position is very important, would that be a key success factor as far as your performance is concerned? Let us consider one more factor now. For example, your effort. Instead of you putting in the effort to study, let us assume your mother puts in the effort to study. What do you think? Is that a key success factor or not? Certainly, yes. Your effort is a key success factor. Okay. Your health is extremely important. That's a key success factor. There are several success factors. Not all will be brought in as a key success factor. That's all that you will understand in these paragraphs which are explained to you. Okay. And then what we also notice is example, prospects and financial attractiveness of industry. As I said to you, it's very important that the industry that you want to get into or you are already in will continue to remain highly prospect oriented, meaning highly beneficial with a good growth rate, growth opportunities, investment opportunities, and it should also be such that it is financially attractive, meaning you will be able to earn good profits. Just imagine if I have to give, for example, I have a daughter and I have to give my daughter in wedding to a person, and the person is one who is basically good for nothing. What is the attractiveness there? I am actually interested in what the prospects and financial attractiveness of the industry is, meaning not the past. How attractive is it expected to be in the future? Take another example. You might have seen in your own life, not related to this management subject, but some students, your own colleagues, might have been studying very poorly till standard 9, but suddenly in standard 10, they start blossoming. Some might have studied very as below average even till 12th. But when you enter the professional course, those who might have excelled in school might probably fail to get a rank in chartered accountancy. But the one who was subpar in the school has now scored a rank in chartered accountancy. What do you find? The futuristic perspective is what is very important and not the past. So bear that in mind when you read this paragraph. Okay, there are some points that are listed here. Those all will be very clear to you if you've understood this concept. Then there is a core competency part. Now, this is a very critical part. What is the meaning of core competency? Well, core is something, of course, which is very central thing, very critical. Competency basically is nothing but something defined as a combination of skills and techniques. Combination is very important rather than individual skill or separate technique. Now, before we move on, all that you need to understand is competency. When we say it's a combination, it is something like this. Let us assume that you are the captain of a particular team which has 10 players. Okay? Each player is an expert in his or her line. Okay? There are 2, 3 bowlers who are fantastic bowlers. There are 7, 8 batsmen, top class batsmen. There is another player who is excellent in his line, maybe fielding. But collectively, when they are brought as a team, they fail to function based on group efforts, meaning they are not able to function pretty well at top level as an amalgam or a combination. Individually, they are doing very well, but collectively there is some mismatch. There is something which is failing, which is not clicking in terms of organizing their individual capabilities in a well blended manner. Another example will be food items. As I said, you might have prepared a delicacy, let's say for example a rasam, but some expert says, well, the blending is not appropriate, it's still, the aroma doesn't seem to be at the top level, something is missing. That's all that we're trying to say. Individually, all the components or ingredients are physically existing, but still the output or the combination fails. Whereas in some other case, we find individually things are existing, collectively as well, it is shining well, it is blossoming well. That's exactly what is referred to here as competency. So we are not saying individual skill or separate technique is not required. Please be very clear, students. We are not at all stating that uh, individual skill or separate technique is not required. We certainly require them, but those individual skills or separate techniques, which are many in numbers, must be blended well such that the organization is able to benefit out of it across the entire organization and not only in a particular part of the organization. That is the meaning. Now, if you move on, you find that therefore core competencies cannot be built on one capability or single technological know-how. Instead, it has to be an integration, teamwork, combination of many resources. Okay, then there are some points which are highlighted. Major core competencies are identified in 3 areas: competitor differentiation. Okay, then there is a customer value and application to other markets. Now, the differentiation means that you should be able to stand out, a class apart, meaning you're unique. It's not possible. It's not easy to imitate you. What you possess is a rare thing. Okay, something like that. And customer values that particular characteristic of yours. Okay, for example, you might be a mathematical genius in the sense, if I ask you what is the square root of a 50-digit number, before I finish stating the 50-digit number, you rattle off the answer. I am asking you what is the 10th root of a 500-digit number. Before I finish the question, you are immediate, or rather, as I complete the question, you shoot out the answer. The world is awestruck. Very good. But if I now give you a real life practical problem in your organization, and if you can't solve, what is the use of this mathematical genius in you? I mean, pure arithmetic, correct? So there is a big difference between theory and practical life. So what we try to understand is customer must value what you possess as a unique spirit or skill, and then you should be able to apply it across your organization in different markets as well. It should not be that that particular competency is applicable only in one particular market of the organization. Across the entire length and breadth of the organization, if you can cross-pollinate and benefit, then such a skill technique is referred to as a core competency. Okay, now going down below, it's explained. That's all fine. You can read these. Well, if the three above mentioned conditions are met, then the company can regard its competency as a core competency. Okay. Now, after reading these examples, I would again like to highlight, please don't quote these these examples itself in examination. Use them as a basis to create your own examples. Okay. Now the next point is why to identify and develop a core competency. Now obviously, why would you want to have team efforts or a combination of skill set with you? Obviously, for addressing the issue of survival of the fittest, you are there to grow. So to ensure that you are able to outbeat the performance of your rival, you must have a core competency which is highly valued by your customers, which will automatically draw your customers to you, attract the customers. Not only attract customers to you from your rivals, but it will also help you retain those customers, meaning customer loyalty will also be ensured. And not only that, they will get you new customers as well, correct? Therefore, it means you will be able to expand or grow your market share. Okay, so what we find now is failing to identify core competencies is a kind of opportunity loss for a company. So if you can't identify your own strength, then obviously you are not reaping the benefit of that strength. You are not able to capitalize on that strength. Okay, that's very important. A core competency fulfills three criteria. One, it should provide potential access to a wide variety of markets. I said to you, its core competency must be used. It is something that can be used across the length and breadth of the company or organization. Two, it should make a significant contribution to the perceived customer benefits of the end product, meaning customer must value it very much. Three, it should be difficult to imitate for competitor or rivals. Okay, that's very, very important. For example, if you have a shirt which can be easily designed outside, well, no one will really worry much about it. No one will try to envy about it. If you have a mobile which can be easily replicated, no one is much bothered about it. But suppose you happen to be a genius, which you are. Can you be sent into a scanning machine and can someone clone another genius in your place? Not possible. So people will have the highest regard for you, which is also true as of now. So there are some examples that are given over here, which you can read. Now, how to build core competencies. Four specific criteria of sustainable competitive advantage that firms can use to determine those capabilities that are core competencies. Now, students, please remember, there is no point in my organization having an advantage only. It must be competitive advantage because we are looking at fighting competition. Not only that, it must be sustainable, meaning what is the use if I score first rank only in first standard and then second rank in second standard, third rank in third standard, and so on and so forth. Once I score the first rank, I should be able to sustain that level. That is why here also we refer to the fact that any core competency must be such that it must be sustainable. Otherwise, in the long run, you can't continue to win, and which means it's not a core competency. So capabilities that are valuable, costly to imitate, and non-substitutable are core competencies. So the first thing that it should be valuable, meaning customers must put some value to it. They must regard it as something which is really very good. Okay? For example, two of you go to meet your friend separately. By looking at you, your friend basically locks up the house and exits from the back door and doesn't want to meet you itself. What do you understand? Are you valuable to that person? No. Whereas the person was actually locking up the house and wanting to go out, but happens to be seeing your other colleague now says, please come to my house, opens up the house, cancels the appointment and sits and spends time with that person. Meaning what? Attaches so much of value to that person. So your capability, your competency must be valuable to the customer. Rare. It's not something which is easily available in the market, because if it is easily available, then you don't have much worth or value for it. So it should be something which is rare, and then it should be something which is costly to imitate. If it is very easy to imitate, people will again easily copy. But if it is going, for example, if I have an original paper and if I need to go for taking a Xerox, and if it is going to take 1 rupee to take a Xerox, I don't care, worry much about it. But if one Xerox is going to cost me 1 lakh rupees, how often do you think I would be interested in imitating it, in taking a Xerox? So your competency to be core competency must to provide competitive sustainable advantage must be such that it is costly to imitate. Okay, if it is easy to imitate, then your rival will easily catch up to you. But if it is very tough from a cost perspective to imitate, then obviously you will have a head start and you will always be leading them. Probably you will win them hands down as well. Non-substitutable. So it should not be possible to locate a substitute for your competency. And here one point is very important. Therefore, I want to read the paragraph to you. Capabilities that do not have strategic equivalence are called non-substitutable capabilities. That's straightforward. So you don't have any strategic equivalent. But how should that strategic equivalent be? This final criterion for a capability to be a source of competitive advantage is that there must be no strategically equivalent valuable resources that are themselves, underlined, that are themselves either not rare or imitable. Now ignore the entire paragraph, look at just these two words, if, or these the last sentence, the last line, sorry. If a resource is either rare or imitable, then what did we learn about in point 2? If it is rare, it will go to constitute a core competency. If the resource is going to be costly to imitate, then also it helps us as a source of core competency to build a sustainable competitive advantage. Therefore, what is being spoken about here is the strategic equivalent to be considered as non-substitutable is something other than the costly to imitate and the rare ones, because these two will automatically be, point 2 and 3 will automatically be the core competency part. So other than them, something should be there which is non-substitutable. So understand it in that perspective, move on. Then you move on to value chain analysis for developing core competency. This concept of value chain analysis was again introduced by Michael Porter. Okay, and this chart, please practice it well. In case a question is asked, please do not fail to use it, present it in your examination answer sheet as well. Now, value chain. Before we pick up this, I am sure each of you will understand what is a chain. It has multiple links to it. You just can't have only one link in a chain. Correct? Chain means sequence of various links. And suppose I have a chain which has 100 links. Let us say a cycle chain. Okay? 100 small components which are connected to form one long chain. Any component that breaks, that gives in, will obviously bring the cycle to a grinding halt. So we are not stating that only subcomponent number 75 is important, all others are not important. Each of those subcomponents in the cycle chain is equally important. But when you now look at an organization, that's not the case. When an output is supposed to be produced, several ingredients are used to produce the output. Not all of those will occupy the same level of value in the minds of the customer. For example, okay, now let us say that you are actually preparing tea for a customer. Okay, when you prepare tea, whether you use mineral water or whether you use, for example, non-mineral water, I don't think really the customer is going to be able to realize that. But if the tea leaf is going to be different, the brand is different, okay, then the customer is able to judge and say, well, this is not what I wanted. For example, someone might say, I want only Tata tea leaves, not anything else. Someone, for example, might say in coffee, I need only filter coffee, not brew coffee. Someone says, I need only brew coffee. Now, whether you add brew coffee to almond milk or you add it to heritage milk, I don't think that's going to create much of an impact. Unless, of course, the fat content is different. If the fat content is the same, the customer might not even, the consumer might not even be able to identify whether heritage milk has been used or some other milk has been used. So, what I'm trying to say is the fact that in the chain, though multiple processes are involved, multiple components are involved, some will be very, very important, many will not be that important. Meaning from the customer perspective. The customer is very much interested in those few components. For example, let us say you take eatable industry in a restaurant. How quick is the service and how good is the quality is what the customer is essentially interested in. Of course, the cleanliness is all important. So, among the several steps that are involved, the customer is essentially interested in knowing that, or the organization is interested in knowing among the 10 processes that are inbuilt in delivering a plate of idli or vada to a customer, step number 3 and 4 is what is extremely important, or step number 10 is what is extremely important. Now, what is step number 10? The waiter must be neatly dressed up, and should be taking the item in an extremely clean plate. Now, just try to imagine if this is going to be compromised upon, will the customer ever buy any edible item there? For example, if the waiter is going to be dressed up in a very untidy manner and an unclean dress, dirty dress, would you ever dare to buy any eatable item there? Definitely not. So, what we understand is not all subcomponents or processes will be equally important in the eyes of the customer. If you remove any one particular item or two or three particular items, the customer says, I don't want your product itself. Whereas if I remove the other 97, meaning the other 97, if I give it to some other person to do also, when I say remove, I'm not saying deleting, because then I can't make the product itself. The other 97, I might give it to some other person. The customer still says, okay. For example, let me give you another example, something similar to what you might have learnt in law and foundation. If Mr. A is used to a particular doctor as a family doctor, Mr. A feels psychologically only if he goes and visits the doctor, family doctor, his problem will get resolved. Though the family doctor is one who might have passed MBBS in his 10th attempt, might have just scored 40%. That family doctor's son or daughter who might be a gold medalist in MBBS and then would have done PhD also, still are not able to gain the same level of confidence with the patient A as their father has been able to secure. Why? Something which is psychological. Now, what I am trying to say, if someone were to tell Mr. A that, well, the father doctor is today not available, has gone out for 1 hour, The son is available now, who is a rank holder, who is a genius. He will look at Mr. A, who is a patient, says, I will go and come back after 1 hour. What are we trying to say? Mr. A is applying the value chain concept. I mean, I am saying here, though there are no multiple processes here in visiting the doctor and coming back, the main point that I am trying to communicate is the concept of value. Mr. A feels that, well, I am willing to pay the same 500 even to the son, but I don't think I'll get that level of satisfaction. I will be satisfied only if I meet my family doctor. So if the family doctor is not available, I am willing not to see the doctor itself. I will wait unless it is an emergency. That's exactly what the customer does. The customer says, if you are not going to do step number 71, 75, and 76 out of those 100 steps, then I don't need your product itself. Well, the other 97 steps, even if you get it done through someone else, I have no problems. Or even if you delete a few, I don't have problem. When I say delete, let us say, for example, you have ordered a piece of furniture, or let's say you have ordered some, let's say, pen drive or something from Amazon, and they deliver it to you in a well-packed cardboard case, which they have also gift wrapped, and they have also tied a gift ribbon to it, and they have given it to you. Now, would it make any difference if they were to send it to you without that gift ribbon? Or would it make any difference to you if they give it to you without the gift wrapping? Yes, it would make a difference to you if they don't even present it in a cardboard, wrap it in a piece of paper and send it to you. Then you say, I won't buy your product. Correct? So, the cardboard packing, for example, or the thermocol packing you're saying is very important to you, not the gift wrapping. Correct? So that's what we are trying to communicate here. So organization will try to analyze. Michael Porter says any organization in general will have primary activities and secondary activities or support activities in this chart. Primary activities, he divides it into 5 different components. Inbound logistics, which deals with arranging for all the material inputs that you need to start processing the raw materials. Then you have operations, which will be the processing part, converting it into finished goods. Outbound logistics. Once the finished goods have been prepared, then how well do you stock them in their inventory, go down and all, and how quickly you are able to supply it to the market, to your consumers. Then marketing and sales, which is self-explanatory, and then how well you service your products. These are the primary activities. The support activities are 4 in nature: procurement, technology, human resource management, and firm infrastructure. These 4 will have to exist to ensure that these 5 primary activities are appropriately supported. As an example, if you have to be able to study well and do well and you get a rank in chartered accountancy, everyone comes and appreciates you and says, wow, what a fantastic performance. And your mother and father are sitting there and you behave as though they have no responsibility there itself. The credit is entirely yours. That is not fair. If the parent had not slogged for you by doing so many activities of yours to ease the time pressure on you, you wouldn't have been in this position to score this mark. So what do we notice? The parents are playing this support activity role to help you achieve your performance in those 5 or 8 odd papers. Correct? So your own effort, your own hard work, your own health, etc., your preparation, those 8 papers, all the primary set, but then there is a support activity as well, which is around you. Okay. Imagine if I am given in my examination hall, I am given a bench which has a huge hole, gaping hole on the desk itself. Where will I place my paper and write? Support activity is very important. Writing is my preparation is my primary activity. But of course, if there is no bench, and the examiner there states that in the hall, invigilator states, excuse me, gentlemen, only in your case, we don't have any chair or any seat. You will have to stand and write. Imagine my condition, apart from laughing. So that's the importance which Michael Porter is trying to highlight, and also explains here the various concepts of primary activities as inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales and service, and then the support activities of procurement, technology development, human resource management, and infrastructure. And then use of value chain analysis for identifying core competence. The reason why we spend some time to understand value chain analysis itself is to try and know how can we use it in trying to identify core competencies. Okay, and then there is a sustainable core competency. As I said, if the core competency is not going to be sustainable, then we don't call it as core itself, because it can't provide any sustainable competitive advantage. So it should be something that will exist with us for a long period of time. And managing linkages is what, through the value chain analysis, we understand that there will be different links in the chain. Each of those links will have to be managed properly. Otherwise, as the adage goes in English, that there is always a slip between the cup and the lip. Any linkage, if it gives in or breaks, then we had it. It's gone. Okay. So managing linkages is very important. Imagine that when a train, an engine is actually pulling across 20 different compartments. Suddenly the 14th compartment alone, the hook between the 13th and the 14th gets dismantled. What happens? It is not that only the 14th will disappear and 13th will automatically get connected to the 15th compartment and will pull the other six. The entire 7 bogies starting from the 14th to the 20th will be basically disconnected. So managing linkages in the entire processing setup is extremely important. Okay, and then we arrive on page 26 at competitive advantage, which we will take up later in the next session. So I recommend to you that you study pretty well up to this point on page 26. Be thorough with it, and I wish you best of luck actually to do it in a very judicious manner. Now, at this point, I would again like to highlight to you students that please ensure that you paid good attention to this, and when you do the first time reading, do it very well such that it facilitates revision later on a frequent basis. Okay, that's very important. Your preparation the first time must be such that second time and onwards the revision is very fast. In case you have any doubts, feel free to reach me. I hope you enjoyed the session. You can always reach me at 9444642613. This is CAMS Swaminathan signing off. Best of luck and bye.